Mr. Clark here. It's time to go through topic 9.2, big business. We're going to take a look at how the United States began to expand in terms of the economy during the mid to late 1800s. We'll look at new management techniques, some of the new innovations, inventions that business used to begin to increase their profits. We'll look at some of the pros and the cons of big business itself. We'll see how the government is going to take steps during this period of time to make sure that businesses do not abuse their powers. So as we go through this, just make sure that on your focus questions, you have the correct answers. You don't have to rewrite your answers or retype your answers. You can just make sure you have something similar. If your answer is somewhat limited, just make sure you add to it. All right, so we start looking here at question number one. After 1870, the number of corporations in America rose dramatically. How can you account for the rise of corporations during this period of time? So this period of American history saw the expansion of the railroad system. The government began to support a lot of capitalistic and free enterprise, laissez-faire policies, meaning that they weren't really getting in the way of big businesses. So if you had money, you knew if you would invest it, you would have the opportunity to make a significant profit. Also, during this period of time, we saw new sources of energy, more efficient manufacturing processes, made things a little bit more efficient in the factories, which meant the bottom dollar of profit will be better for business owners. Corporate structure supported business, helping them to expand. They allowed them to acquire capital. The banking system began to expand. So even if you weren't significantly wealthy, you could take out a loan to begin to start a business, kind of take a risk. Two, how did the formation of corporations lessen the risk that businesses took? Well, prior to a corporation, if you wanted to start a business, you had to invest in the entire amount of money yourself. In a corporation, many people share the ownership of the business. And when you have a multiple person ownership of businesses, therefore you share in the risk and in the rewards. So if the business collapsed, you only lose the amount of money you invested. So let's say you invested 10% of all your money in a business instead of 100%. Well, you would only lose 10% of your money rather than 100%. So corporations were the perfect solution to the challenges, too, of expanding businesses. If you had multiple investors, let's say you had one restaurant or one shop, you can obviously expand if you had multiple investors. Corporations, too, they work towards the bottom dollar, the general goal of increasing or maximizing profits. They advertised their products for the first time during the 1800s. This began to allow for citizens across the country to, learn about the products and understand perhaps maybe they do need some of these new products that are being developed. Another way they kept their profit high was paying workers low, very low wages, long hours. They kind of exploited workers early on in the business process. They adopted forms of business organization such as horizontal and vertical integration, which we'll take a look at in a little more detail as we move forward. These two techniques help them once again to maximize profits. All right, so let's take a look at the things that are similar and different between horizontal and vertical integration. So in both cases, they want to integrate smaller businesses to create larger ones. So it's kind of through consolidation. So if you have a whole bunch of small businesses, let's say you have people who are looking for oil. So you have just one person looking for one well at a time with just one rig to do so. But if you have a huge oil company come in, they kind of canvass the entire area, which means they can hit all the different spots as they kind of look for oil. So by combining smaller into big, this maximized profits. This reduced a lot of, redundancy. Also eliminated competition, which is really an important thing as well. For horizontal integration, this occurs when competing businesses merge into one larger company. This allows new, larger businesses to lower their production cost and in some cases control prices of a product or service. Vertical integration, this occurs when a company gains control of all aspects of the manufacturing process. from the acquisition of raw materials to the distribution to the sale of the final product. So if you want to look, let's say, at an oil company today, if you own a vertically integrated company, you own the rigs that find the oil, the tankers who move the oil, the trucks which then bring it to the refineries. You own the refineries to kind of convert it into gas. Then you own the trucks again to bring the gas to the gas stations, and then you own the gas stations themselves to sell the finished product or the gas to the consumer. So that's kind of a vertically integrated process. If it was horizontal, then you might only own one of those processes. Let's say you're just a random gas station owner in Metuchen, and then you own that gas station, and all the other aspects of getting the gas to your gas station occurs by other companies. Hopefully that helped. Next, we'll look at one of the biggest entrepreneurs, biggest business people during this period of time, one of the wealthiest citizens in the history of our country. His name was John Rockefeller. How did he attempt to eliminate competition? By creating what is known as a cartel. Well, he was an oil tycoon. So the example I used before about a business owner who controls all aspects of the process, that was a Rockefeller idea. He monopolized, controlled all aspects of getting the oil and the movement, sale, and distribution. So he looked to eliminate competition along the way. In this arrangement, businesses make the same product. They agreed to limit production to keep prices high. Rockefeller made special arrangements with railroad companies that made it difficult for his competitors to ship their products from place to place. There you can see Rockefeller pictured. He was the head of the Standard Oil Company and part of the mainstream corporate America. Now, one way that Rockefeller kind of put his competition out of business, let's say, for example, you've been driving around with your family and you see 4 gas stations on 4 different corners. They're all different owned gas stations, and they all have their prices posted. Sometimes there's a little bit of variance, of a couple cents per gas station, but generally they're very similarly priced. So what Rockefeller did is, let's say each of those gas stations normally sell for $1 million. Well, he would go into a market, and nobody wants to sell their gas station for $1 million or 1.1 million because they like their position. They don't necessarily want to sell. So in order to get one of those gas stations to sell, he would buy that first gas station for $2 million. So he paid double the amount for that gas station. And what he would do is, let's say gas was selling for, let's say $2 a gallon. He would lower gas down to 99 cents a gallon or 50 cents a gallon at his gas station, which he would actually be selling gas at a loss. But what would happen then over the course of weeks and months, nobody would go to those other 3 gas stations. And as a result, once the market changed where they couldn't sell their gas, Rockefeller would go in, and instead of offering $1 million for those gas stations, which is what they were worth, let's say a few months back, he would offer $500,000 or $700,000 maybe to the first one who would take the offer. Then he would lower the price at that gas station, and eventually he would force the other 2 gas stations to sell out as well. That's how he would monopolize the market. So if the regular price of gas was $2 per gallon, well, once he owned all 4 gas stations, he didn't charge $2 a gallon. He charged $2.50 or $3 because he monopolized that market, and that's how he made his profit back. Okay, what is a trust? And how did Rockefeller use this to further eliminate competition? In a trust, companies assign their stock to a board of trustees who combine them into a new organization that the trustees ran, which is called a trust. But in the early 1880s, Rockefeller and his Standard Oil Trust controlled most of all oil refined in the United States. So this is another step in the process that I described earlier of Rockefeller beginning to take full control of the oil industry in the United States. Seven, a monopoly is also what you can just kind of describe the term for what I described before. It's when a business has complete control of an industry without competition. Business owners can raise prices as high as they wish. So that's back to that example of Rockefeller and owning all 4 of those gas stations on 4 corners, and then instead of charging the normal or regular price of $2 a gallon, increased it to $2.50 or $3 a gallon to kind of maximize his profit. And basically over the course of a short period of time, he made back all the money he had invested and lost a little bit when he was selling gas too cheaply for a short period of time. A counterpart to Rockefeller, another great wealthy individual during this period of time in history, was Andrew Carnegie. He made his money in the steel industry. Carnegie actually had visited Great Britain shortly before investing in the steel industry in the United States. He went and saw one of the earliest steel factories. He observed the Bessemer process of making steel, and he realized that that's where the direction of the country and the world was going to go. They were going to slowly but surely move from iron to steel. And so by being the innovator here in the United States, he was on the forefront of the expansion of the steel industry. Carnegie, he was involved in all different stages in the manufacturing process. He owned the coal mines, the iron ore fields that provided the raw materials for his steel, as well as the ships and railroads that brought those raw materials to the steel factories. And this, again, is an example of vertical integration. There's Carnegie there, a little picture of him and his steel company, and the movement here into his steel factory. The train comes up, and they're able to get all the supplies here to begin manufacturing the steel. Why do many consumers begin to fear the growth of big businesses during the late 1800s? Many small businesses were brought up or squeezed out of competition. Many consumers were alarmed by the high prices that monopolies and cartels sometimes set on their products. They're beginning to see some of the nightmares that can happen if there's too much power, too much control by one business owner. Government's laissez-faire policies, too, helped to allow for some of these monopolies to occur because they weren't interfering with some of these, I guess, sketchy or not necessarily consumer-friendly policies that the big business owners were handing out. Many wealthy business leaders like Carnegie, Rockefeller, or the Vanderbilts were important philanthropists. When you think about a philanthropist, this is somebody who makes a tremendous amount of money, but instead of just holding on to their money and being super greedy with it, they kind of look for ways to give back to society. So when you think about these individuals that we're discussing, obviously it seems like they had a lot of sketchy business practices, but in the end, they did do a number of positive things for society. They donated money that led to the establishment of universities, museums, libraries, things that you've probably heard of today and maybe you didn't realize until you began studying this particular section. Rockefeller Center and Carnegie Hall were both donated by Rockefeller and Carnegie respectively, and they're still around today to help out quite a bit and provide joy for American citizens. Something that was unfortunate during this period of time, I guess you're familiar with the theory of evolution and the origin of species and survival of the fittest that came from Charles Darwin's theories. Survival of the fittest is the idea that a more, I guess, perfect version of a species will kind of push out the less fortunate one. So, for example, over the course of time, let's say you had in a grassy area, you had green snakes and you had white snakes. Well, over the course of time, the white ones kind of died out because the green ones were the ones that could blend into the grass and would be hidden then from the predators. So certain traits get kind of weeded out over the time of evolution, and certain species become a little bit more dominant, or even certain traits within species become more dominant over the course of time. That's Darwin's scientific theory. So social Darwinism is the application of Darwinism to human beings, is survival of the fittest philosophy, that competition between different individuals within society, the better business person, the person who meets with more financial success, has every right to put out of business as competition. Social Darwinism was used to justify prejudice in some cases as well by asserting that poverty, from which many minorities and recent immigrants in the country suffered from, was evidence of their lack of fitness rather than results of racism. So they almost use it as a mask to kind of cover some of their, racist or prejudiced philosophies. The changing relationship between government and businesses. What actions taken by railroad companies concerned consumers? Well, competing railroads during this period of time took into the practice of fixing rates, pooling, or entering into secret agreements to divide up the nation's freight. Many Americans felt that the price fixing and pooling drove up their rates and were unfair to consumers. So as a result, and we're going to see this as we move forward throughout the next few sections and chapters, we're going to see that during the 1800s into the early 1900s, we're going to discover problems within society, and it's going to be the role of the government to come up with solutions to address those issues. And one such, solution was the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. This was established to create and monitor railroad shipping rates that cross state lines. So if you had a railroad carrying supplies from New York to New Jersey to Pennsylvania across the state lines, it would be then regulated and supervised by the ICC. So the ICC was the very first federal agency to begin to monitor business practices. Over the next several decades, the government will create many other federal bodies and organizations to help regulate business, supervise things, and try and work for the average American citizen to make sure things weren't getting out of control. Another potential solution during this period of time in history was the Sherman Antitrust Act, passed in 1890. It outlawed any trust that operated in restraint of trade or commerce among several states. The government claimed that it had a constitutional right to regulate such commerce. Some of the advantages, as you can see in the little visual here, allowed Congress to regulate trade between states and end monopolistic practices. They tried to eliminate hidden monopolies or trust that impacted trade. This enabled competitors to sue trustees or rival companies for loss of revenue. Also levied fines against those forming trust. Disadvantages, sometimes difficult to enforce, lacked a clear definition of the practices that result in the restraint of trade, and more often used successfully against labor unions than monopolies. In the United States, there's a history of tension between businesses and government. We're going to give a couple examples of some tension between business and government. Public outcry against railroads, fixing of rail rates, resulting in Congress's creation of the ICC would be one example of a conflict between business and government. However, court rulings tended to favor states and railroads, which weakened some of the commission's power. So the ICC was somewhat powerless initially, as there was constant lawsuits and different things that kind of went against the ICC. In a similar fashion, the Sherman Antitrust Act went after John D. Rockefeller and others who formed trusts to try to achieve control of certain markets. Once again, the courts would rule in, and in some cases would rule in favor of the big business owner. What central points does the text make about the ongoing relationship between businesses, governments, and consumers? This still remains true today. It's always a difficult balance, a very challenge there to kind of balance the interest of businesses versus that of individual consumers and decide who should be responsible in, setting policies and creating that balance. Should it be the government? Should it be the free market system, supply and demand, capitalism kind of determining the price of goods, or should there be prices that are fixed at a certain rate or level? Lesson reflection were big business tycoons like Rockefeller and Carnegie, robber barons who were bad for the nation as a whole, or captains of industry who served the nation well. Support your answers with text information. Positives, they view the business tycoons who served the country well, convincing businesses that they did good things by establishing these businesses. They kind of created new markets for the country, new products, made things more widely available. They helped to stimulate the American economy, creating jobs and lowered prices, created business efficiencies, helped make the United States a world economic leader. And you would argue then, too, that they gave some of their money back in terms of grants and things like that, as they were philanthropists as well. And they would say that this outweighs some of the negative aspects of their impact. The negatives, of course, they drove small businesses out of businesses. They were very ruthless with the competition. Sometimes they would raise prices, which was not in the best interest of the consumers, to kind of make back some of their investment. And often they paid workers very low wages. It's up to you as an individual to determine whether or not big business owners during this period of time, like Rockefeller, Carnegie, The Vanderbilts were positive or negative in our nation's history. Hope you enjoyed 9.2. Mr. Clark is out.